If you want to support the channel, you can use code tablemon to get 5% off at Potent Store for your online codes, 10% off for your sealed product at Flipside Gaming, and 10% off on your aluminum accessories at TC Evolutions. Or if you're looking to buy singles or sleeves, you can fill up your cart and close the tab, then click on the affiliate link in the description and check out. That way you can support the channel over at TCG Player, Card Market, and Dragon Shield. ¿Eres de México y necesitas cartas de Pokémon? Busca Hyperbeam Cards en Facebook e Instagram. Y si estás en Tijuana, búscalos en el local C27 en el Centro Comercial Otay. Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video here at tablemon. So we are finally in 2024. Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we are starting off the season, or the year rather, with a regional already this weekend. Portland Regionals happening, and I am going to play in that one. I'm very excited. It's been a while since I've played in an event, all the way back to Curitiba in Brazil. So I'm really looking forward to playing this weekend, and I figured I would give you all my thoughts on the tiers, what I expect to be the more powerful decks going into this weekend, and also potentially popular as well. So let's get started, and big props to Trainer Hill for providing this tool. I feel like I'm going to be trying to do this sort of videos for every regional, whether it's North America or anywhere else in the world. I will be trying to make these sort of videos if you enjoy it. So starting off with Giratina Lost Zone box. I think this deck is very clearly S tier at the moment. I expect the popularity of this deck after Grant Hayes got second place and barely lost out to Azul in the finals to really go up for this weekend. The consistency of the deck has not changed at all, but it is a deck that can do it all if it's able to set up. It has one-hit KOs, damage to the bench, early aggression with Cramorant, sniping with Sableye, one-hit KOs with 280 or the V-Star, so can pretty much do it all. The question is always, can you get there? And maximizing consistency, obviously the way to go. And then you always have the comeback potential with Counter Catcher, Roxanne, and Path to the Peak. So pretty powerful deck, I would say. Next up we have Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon did do pretty well at the Japanese Kyoto Champions League this past, or like a few weeks ago. I do believe this deck is more powerful than it's been given credit, but also extremely linear, and I don't expect its popularity to go up too much. I think it's a good deck, but it definitely struggles with I don't know, like powering up back to back to back. It struggles with a weak early hand, doesn't have a lot of great comeback potential, and leaving your Roaring Moons active self-damaged is not ideal. So it is a good deck, it is powerful, and the Darkrai V-Star plus Crossivers do make it a little more interesting, but I will say this deck doesn't really quite cut it in terms of numbers or strength as something like Giratina Lost Zone box. Now, moving on to Gardevoir. Gardevoir, a pretty powerful deck as well. It hasn't performed this past few weeks since Paradox Rift came out. Hasn't gotten any really big powerful result. I did win Brisbane Regionals, so pardon me. It did win Brisbane Regionals the weekend after LAIC. I feel like when the dust hadn't finished settling. Miraidon and Iron Hands EX are the biggest gatekeepers for Gardevoir at the moment, but Gardevoir should have a pretty good matchup against Charizard, and has a decent matchup against Giratina, has a good matchup against Roaring Moon, has a very good matchup against a lot of these decks. The issue with Gardevoir is always itself. It's setting up, and that is why Gardevoir is a very powerful deck, but also hasn't been performing too well. But with Charizard's dominant performances over the course of the last few weeks, with Azul winning the last regional, I do expect Miraidon to drop off a little bit, not too much. It's still a very powerful deck, of course, and not every deck you're going to be playing is Charizard. But once Miraidon is going down, then Gardevoir should go up, especially because Charizard is a good matchup for Gardevoir. And then once Gardevoir goes up, then Miraidon comes up again and counters the Gardevoir and then Charizard. And so we have this sort of like rock, paper, scissors triangle between Miraidon, Charizard, and Gardevoir, but I do think Gardevoir is a pretty decent pick for this weekend. Now, Lost Zone box, not including Charizard, Lost box, the high HPs of Charizard, the presence of Entei and Urshifu as well in the metagame. Gardevoir has always had a pretty decent matchup against Lost Zone box. I feel like Giratina played well, can easily handle Lost Zone box. So overall, I think the deck is cool. However, I'm not sure it can really get all the way. This upcoming weekend in Portland has to maneuver around Iron Hands, has to maneuver around the high HP Charizard, which I think is the biggest struggle that Lost Zone box has. Everything else can be manageable, but the 330 HP, no really good grass type attacker. You have Tropius, I guess, but you also need the triple weakness, the super effective classes gimmick, and then that takes up a lot of space. And then what else are you attacking with? It's just a little too much for my liking, so Lost Zone box will remain in the B tier. Now, Entei and Urshifu has consistently been doing well. It's never played in big enough numbers really, but it is a pretty powerful deck. I think putting or having 3 prize Pokemon liabilities in play is something that scares off a lot of people, but spreading damage and then with the technical machine devolution, definitely a very powerful and decent deck. And I do expect it to go up, rather to stay pretty stable in popularity across the whole of the Paradox Rift metagame, unless it ends up winning an event. But I don't think you should expect a lot of it this weekend. All these decks will be present, it's just how much. And I think Entei and Urshifu will be played in decent numbers, but just not super high. Next up, we have Gholdengo with its most recent iteration with Palkia. I believe I made a short video once Gholdengo was announced, how it could be combined with a lot of things, and Palkia was the first Pokemon that I mentioned. And turns out that the best performing Gholdengo deck from the Kyoto Champions League was that Gholdengo with Palkia. And it makes sense, right? Palkia opens up another dimension to the deck, not only as an attacker, but also opening up Greninja threat, so that you're not only a straightforward do a lot of damage to the active deck with Gholdengo EX. So I really like the deck. However, is it powerful enough? It does still take 7 energies to 1 KO a Charizard, and getting 3 back-to-back knockouts is not always easy. So I know how powerful this deck is. I honestly haven't played with it too much, but results are not in its favor. So I'm gonna put Gholdengo in the B tier for now. But if there's gonna be a weekend where Gholdengo can surprise everyone and finally get some results and even some day 2 pages, it probably will be Portland, coming off from the hype from the Kyoto Champions League. Now, next up we have Miraidon. I think Miraidon is still a pretty powerful deck despite the huge Charizard presence. Miraidon will be always a very good choice. However, it does have some glaringly bad matchups in Charizard, a little difficult Giratina matchup if they stabilize, and Entei and Urshifu can be a little complicated as well. So having a meh to even matchup against 3 of the top decks in the format, probably not ideal for Miraidon, but it does have going its way that it's a pretty simple deck, it's a pretty powerful deck, and therefore you can just run over people who falter a little bit in their setup, right? And it does have a pretty good Gardevoir matchup, which I do expect will be a little more popular this upcoming weekend. Now, the BDIF at this point in time, I would say, is Charizard, not only in terms of popularity, but also in strength. It has the possibility to handle everything. It does have a few difficult matchups, especially against Giratina and Gardevoir, the other tier S decks, but just not quite where you would not play this deck. Yeah, just because they're difficult matchups doesn't mean they're impossible. And once again, any faltering from Gardevoir, any missed Colress turn for Giratina, and all of a sudden you are running away with the game. And if I were playing Charizard this weekend, I would definitely be considering text for the mirror, not only the justified gloves, but perhaps a technical machine devolution in the deck to help combat mirror matches. Yes, you take less prize cards overall. However, disabling your opponent's Pidgeot, whether you're ahead or behind, whilst taking a prize on their active Charizard, and them needing to set up the next Charizard and potentially their Pidgeot again is such a difficult task. So TM Devolution, something to consider for Charizard mirror matches for sure. Now, Chien-Pao Excalibur. I'm gonna put this deck in the B tier in terms of popularity and also strength, but I do believe Chien-Pao has a pretty good Charizard matchup, a pretty good Gardevoir matchup, and also an even-ish Giratina matchup. So having a decent matchup against all of those can be pretty good. And with Miraidon going down, I do feel like Chien-Pao Excalibur is a pretty decent deck at this point in time and a decent pick whenever Charizard is at its best. That is when Chien-Pao Excalibur will also very likely be at its best. However, that doesn't take away from the issues that the deck inherently has in setting itself up, establishing the threats, establishing the B-roll so that you're not weak to Iono, and then getting that B-roll KO'd. So the deck itself has enough issues to where that's probably the main thing holding it back, but having bench damage with Greninja, having 2 prize knockouts with Iron Hands, and having 1 kills on anything with Chien-Pao, that's never going to be a bad thing. Yeah, it's just the deck itself sometimes falls apart before you even get to play the game. Next up we have Mew Genesect. I think the big Charizard presence is the one thing holding this deck back, but if Charizard wasn't such a big deck, Mew Genesect would probably be in the S tier. It's a very reliable deck. The disruption of Judge Path cannot be underestimated, and that alone can sometimes carry Mew through the Charizard games. So Mew Genesect, a pretty good pick. Now, if you take a look at San Antonio numbers though, there wasn't any Mew Genesect at the very top, and that's because 7 out of the top 10 decks had the Spiritomb. So perhaps, now that I think about it, Mew Genesect, the Judge Path version, probably a B tier deck at this point. It's a very powerful deck, and since it didn't do well the previous weekend because there was a lot of Spiritomb, or the previous event because there was a lot of Spiritomb, that usually means there's less Spiritomb and more Mew. Now the issue is that Spiritomb is no longer just stopping Mew, it's also stopping Rotom in Charizard and Snorlax decks, and also always stops Lumineon. So that might make Spiritomb not go down too much in popularity, but we'll have to see. Some decks you can just beat, even if they have Spiritomb, such as Inteleon, and playing 1 or 2 copies of Fusion Energy can also be pretty decent. But I would say the Fusion Mew version might be a little better pick than Mew Genesect or the Judge Path build this upcoming weekend, but it's pretty close. Yeah, pretty close. Now the 2 Snorlax style versions, I would say these decks are definitely really powerful. I don't expect them to go up in popularity. It's just not a very appealing deck to many people. They'd rather play something against it or tech against it than actually use it themselves, but there will be people playing the deck and essentially having fun with it, and therefore, and when Charizard is one of the biggest decks in the format, it does make sense to have this as your pick. It's very powerful, it's not going to be very popular, but still a decent pick. However, since it did do quite well this past weekend, I feel like that's when people are most likely to try to counter the deck. And now, the rest of the decks are pretty fringe picks. Cloth Electrode, C tier. It's a cool, funny deck. Has a grass type attacker to deal with Charizard and trade favorably, which is nice. Cloth is a decent fighting type Pokemon, but there isn't a lot that you're hitting with the fighting types other than Miraidon. And then outside of that, your Tina, your Gardevoir, even your Entei and Urshifu matchups are just not that great. So Mew as well. So probably not a great pick if you are trying to make day 2, but it will be played, and it's something that you should at least know how it works so that you can play to its weaknesses. Now Palkia, a deck that did get top 4 at the last San Antonio Regionals. I feel like it's a decent deck for sure. How powerful it is, I'm not quite sure. I've played with it a little bit, not the biggest fan, and I guess I would put it anywhere between B and C tier. I'm going to put in the C tier at this point in time. It has gotten 2 top 4 so far, so it definitely has merits, but I'm still not quite convinced that it can handle the big threats in Giratina and Charizard and Gardevoir consistently enough to really justify the deck. So kind of keep it at C tier, and maybe I'll be proven wrong. And then we have our LAIC second place deck, which has not done anything since. Yeah, it has barely made any day 2s afterwards. The deck just gets outclassed by Charizard, gets outclassed by Gardevoir. If you don't get rushed by that deck in the beginning, if you stabilize, then the game is essentially over. And when there aren't a lot of, like when you don't have a great matchup against those sort of decks, which are choosing to go second, which are trying to stabilize a lot, not ideal. And then you struggle with the higher HP things, and having your main attacker be weak to Entei and VMAX is also not ideal. Has a pretty atrocious Mew matchup as well. So just overall a really harsh environment for the LAIC second place deck, Entei, Iron, Valiant. Lugia, it's probably at the weakest it has ever been. A year almost from its release, Lugia went from the very top all the way to the bottom, the opposite of zero to hero. Lugia went from I mean, people would maybe not call the deck hero, would call it villain, right? But hero to zero, Lugia Archeops, not a good pick when Charizard is the top deck in the metagame by far. And even if you're playing the basic energies and just trying to get Iron Hands or not, it's just not a great deck overall at this point in time. Iron Valiant Urshifu, I feel like this deck is something that has not been seen at all over on this side of the world. It has continually been getting decent results over in Japan, and it's like Entei Urshifu is a pretty powerful deck, Iron Valiant Urshifu is a different approach, but similar strategy, right? Still has a Medicham, still has the bench damage, but does it with a basic instead of with a 3-prize VMAX Pokemon. Doesn't have the attacking option of Entei, of course, but just different strategies, different decks. I do think the deck is underestimated. Might not be as good as Entei Urshifu, definitely not an A tier deck, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that amongst the top tables. Very few, but I would not be surprised since it is a pretty decent deck. And then finally, Charizard Lost Zone box. I differentiate that from the regular Lost Zone box. Another B tier deck, in my opinion. I mean, obviously it won a regionals. It's a powerful deck, but I have not been impressed by it at all with its Charizard matchup, with its Gardevoir matchup. I feel like you can definitely surprise people with a TM Devolution, but if the Charizard knows that those cards are being played in the deck, it's easy to prepare for them. And I also feel like it struggles a little with Giratina Lost Zone box as well, if they know how to go about it and aren't afraid to go in with Giratina for the last few prizes. So overall, not the biggest fan of the deck. Definitely not going to be very popular, but I would not be surprised to see it do well. It's just not my cup of tea at this point in time, but it is definitely a powerful deck. So that's my tier list for this upcoming weekend. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you not agree? I'm personally pretty confident that this, in terms of popularity and the popularity curve, Charizard, Gardevoir, and Giratina, I would not be surprised for them to be the most popular decks, followed by Miraidon, Mew, and Entei. You can quote me on that. Maybe Roaring Moon over Entei and Urshifu, but 6 decks do appear there, and I'm very confident in the top 3. The rest, we could see lost boxes since they're all meshed up together over there, but Mew and Miraidon amongst the top 5 decks as well. That's what I'm expecting. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.